AITA for preemptively striking against splitting the bill at a group dinner. I was invited to a group dinner the other night, and honestly, I almost declined. Normally, I do decline these invitations because there are two couples in this group who are notorious for freeloading. Every single time we go out, they order the most expensive dishes on the menu, stack up appetizers, fancy cocktails, and decadent desserts, and then, when the bill comes, they act like it is only natural for everyone to split it evenly. Meanwhile, I always stick to something reasonably priced, usually a simple entree and maybe a soda. I do not drink alcohol at restaurants often, and I definitely do not go wild with appetizers or desserts unless it is a special occasion. But with this group, the check always ends up way higher than it should be for what I actually consume, and I get stuck subsidizing their indulgence. But this time, I was told they would not be there. That was the only reason I agreed to go. I figured it would finally be a normal dinner where everyone just paid for what they actually ordered instead of this absurdly unbalanced system where a couple of people gained the generosity of the group. So, I said yes. I arrived at the restaurant, and the moment I stepped into the private dining area where our table was set up, my stomach sank. There they were. The freeloading couples. Sitting right there, already looking at the menu, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. I did not even bother asking what had changed, why they were there when I was explicitly told they would not be. Because at the end of the day, it did not matter. The outcome was going to be the same. I already knew exactly what was going to happen when the check came. I sat down, feeling a little annoyed but still determined to enjoy the night. The conversation was fine, the food smelled amazing, and I reminded myself that just because they were there did not mean I had to play into their game. I ordered my meal, something reasonably priced, like always, and a Coke. Meanwhile, the usual suspects went all out. Appetizers, rounds of fancy cocktails, extra sides, a dessert menu in hand before the entrees even arrived. It was the same old story. At some point, between bites of food and sips of soda, I made my move. I excused myself from the table, quietly walked over to our server, and politely asked if he could separate my check from the rest of the group. He agreed without hesitation, and I felt an instant sense of relief. Finally, I was going to pay for my own food, and only my own food. The meal continued, and I did my best to stay engaged in the conversation without letting my irritation bubble over. But I was just waiting for the moment I knew was coming, the moment the bill arrived and the freeloaders did their usual routine. Sure enough, when the server returned with the check, one of them looked around the table and said, "Oh, I thought we were splitting like we always do." They had the same expression they always did, like this was some well-established tradition, some sacred agreement that everyone had to abide by. But this time, I did not play along. I handed my credit card to the server before they could even blink and said, "Oh, well, you're bad." And just like that, my part was done. I tipped the server 25% because he had been great, and I was more than happy to reward him for accommodating me. And then, the best part happened. Two other people at the table, clearly inspired by my move, immediately asked for separate checks as well. The server, still standing there, nodded and started working on it. The freeloaders looked around, clearly unsettled. This was not how things were supposed to go for them. The usual plan was falling apart right in front of them. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and with a polite smile, I told everyone good night and left. The next day, I got a text from another person in the group. Not one of the freeloaders, but someone else. She accused me of being an asshole for what I did. She said the group always splits the bill because it gives everyone a chance to have a nice meal they could not otherwise afford, and that it also makes the 20% gratuity easier to divide among everyone. I just stared at the message for a second, baffled at the logic. Since when was it my job to subsidize other people's dining habits? And if the 20% gratuity was such a concern, why not just calculate it and split that part evenly while still paying for our own meals? I responded and told her I would not be guilted into spending more than I was comfortable with just so other people could eat extravagantly on my dime. Then I told her the only reason I came in the first place was because I was under the impression that those specific people would not be there. I made it very clear that this had been a pattern for years, and I was tired of it. Still, she kept pushing, saying I had disrupted the group vibe. But had I really? Because I was not the only one who asked for a separate check. The moment I did it, two others did as well. If anything, all I did was remind people that they had a choice. So, tell me, was I really in the wrong? Because from where I am standing, I just refuse to be taken advantage of. Update 1. As soon as I got that ridiculous text accusing me of being an asshole for not letting myself get taken advantage of, I knew I had to share it. I wasn't about to sit there and let someone guilt-trip me for something I had every right to do, so I forwarded the message to the 2 other people who had also asked for separate checks that night. I figured they'd be as irritated by it as I was, but I wasn't prepared for how strongly they reacted. Both of them were immediately upset by the audacity of it. They reassured me that I was absolutely not in the wrong, not even a little bit. They admitted they were growing tired of the moochers too, and if anything, they wished they had stood up for themselves sooner. One of them even said that the so-called group vibe had already been disrupted long before this dinner, back when I first stopped coming to these outings. He pointed out that everyone knew exactly why I had stopped, even if it was never said out loud. It had made the freeloading the unspoken elephant in the room. And that was on him, he admitted, for not addressing it sooner, all because he just wanted to go along to get along. The other person agreed completely and added that they honestly missed having me there. They both did. And hearing that actually meant something. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the outsider who just wasn't willing to play along with the unspoken rules. I wasn't the only one who had a problem with it, I was just the only one who acted on it first. That realization gave all 3 of us a push to reach out to the solo member who hadn't asked for a separate check. She was also the one who had organized the dinner in the first place, which made this even more complicated. None of us knew exactly how she felt about what had gone down, but we figured it was worth talking to her. And right away, the first thing she did was apologize to me. She admitted she had messed up big time, that she should have told me the mooching couples were coming after all, because there was plenty of time to inform me. But she really wanted me to come. And when she saw the look on my face the moment I spotted them at the table, she knew she had made a mistake. And then she admitted something else. She was tired of the mooching too. She had been for a while. But she had been too much of a coward to say anything, and by not saying anything, she had only made it easier for them to continue. Her silence was just another piece of ammo for their "we always do it this way" argument. And she hated that. Because the truth was, nobody else actually wanted to do it this way, it was just easier to go along with it than to deal with the inevitable pushback. But now that it had been disrupted, now that someone had actually stood their ground, there was no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Then she told us what happened after we left. And honestly, it was kind of amazing. Because once the 3 of us were gone, the others started to reconsider things. At first, it was just a few people hesitating, but eventually, one by one, everyone else asked for separate checks too. The freeloaders were absolutely furious. They had counted on everyone blindly going along with the usual split-the-check routine, and now, suddenly, that safety net was gone. They tried to justify it the same way that girl in the text had, saying it wasn't a big deal, that it was just a way to make sure everyone could enjoy a nice meal, that it was about being generous and making things easier. But then they got bolder. They outright said that they had expenses the rest of us didn't and that it wouldn't kill us to help them have a little joy in their lives. As if that was somehow our responsibility. As if we were supposed to just be okay with footing the bill for their lifestyle choices. And that was when everyone else finally started to see it for what it was. Not a tradition. Not a way to foster some kind of communal generosity. Just blatant mooching. By the time the night was over, the freeloaders were still fuming, but they had no choice but to pay their actual share for once. And it was clear they were not happy about it. And now, the 4 of us have made a decision. We are done with that dynamic. We are done with that group as it was. And we are absolutely done with enabling freeloaders who try to mask their entitlement as some kind of collective generosity. We are going to start having a new group dinner at a different restaurant. Update 2. We really thought we were free. After everything that had happened, after the confrontation, the separate checks, the fallout, we were finally starting fresh. We had planned everything carefully, new restaurant, new group, no freeloaders. It was supposed to be a clean break, a chance to enjoy dinner without side-eyeing the menu, wondering how much extra we'd have to cover for someone else's extravagance. We had chosen the Copper Oak, a cozy little steakhouse that none of us had been to before, partly because it had great reviews, but mostly because it was completely off the radar of our old dining group. The excitement in the air was noticeable, a kind of quiet relief humming through the group as we settled in. It was the first time in ages that we weren't bracing ourselves for what would happen when the check came. There was no tension, no silent calculation of how much extra we'd have to cough up. We weren't trying to game the menu, making sure to pick something moderately priced so the damage wouldn't be too bad when it was time to split the bill. This time, we were actually just ordering what we wanted. Some got steaks, others went for seafood, one of us tried a specialty pasta that came highly recommended. Drinks were chosen without worry, and the atmosphere was light, warm, full of easy conversation and laughter. It felt different from the start. The energy at the table was something we hadn't realized we'd been missing. It was freeing. No longer burdened by the weight of someone else's indulgence, we could just enjoy the meal for what it was, good food, good company, and none of the underlying resentment that had become a permanent fixture in our past dinners. Every bite tasted better knowing we were in control of our own choices. Every sip of a drink was savored because it wasn't tinged with the knowledge that we were, by default, subsidizing someone else's excess. The group dynamic was right for the first time in years, and we all felt it. And then, just as the server brought out the first round of drinks, the mood shifted. Greg and Lisa walked in. The freeloaders. At first, it didn't even register. It was like seeing something completely out of place, something that didn't belong in this setting. Like a glitch in reality, a fragment of the past forcing its way into a future it wasn't meant to be part of. But then Greg made direct eye contact with me, and the smug look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some random chance encounter. They knew we were here. They knew exactly where we'd be. Someone had spilled the location. The realization must have hit all of us at the same time because the energy at the table changed instantly. The conversation died down mid-sentence. The warmth in the moment drained away like someone had pulled the plug. The laughter stopped, and what had been an easy, comfortable meal suddenly became something else entirely. Jess, who had been the one to organize this dinner, set her drink down slowly, her fingers tightening around the stem of the glass. Her lips parted slightly in disbelief, but before she could even process what was happening, it was already too late. They were here. And they weren't leaving. Greg and Lisa waltzed right up to the table like they belonged there. Not a flicker of hesitation, not a hint of embarrassment. They pulled up chairs with the kind of audacity that only comes from years of getting away with things. Their presence alone demanded acknowledgement, but none of us spoke at first. We were too busy trying to process the sheer nerve of what was happening. Lisa, of course, was the first to break the silence, flipping open a menu with an exaggerated scoff, making sure we all heard her when she said it was kind of rude that we didn't invite them. Greg, ever the opportunist, gave a theatrical shrug, playing the part of the gracious friend who had shown up despite our supposed exclusion. His eyes flickered with amusement as he scanned our faces, relishing the disruption he had just caused. Jess was the first to snap out of the initial shock. She turned to them with an expression that could have stopped a lesser person in their tracks and demanded to know how they had found us. Greg just smirked, playing coy, dragging it out just to make it more infuriating. But Lisa, who could never resist rubbing salt in a wound, let it slip almost immediately. Josh had told them. The one person who had hesitated when the rest of us broke free. The one who had still been clinging to the old group dynamic, the one who hadn't asked for a separate check that night, the one who had apologized for the freeloaders as if he wasn't enabling them himself. We all turned to him at once. Josh looked like he wanted to disappear. He stammered something weak, some excuse about just mentioning it in passing, about not thinking they would actually show up. But everyone at the table knew that was a lie. Greg and Lisa were always going to show up if they knew. That was their entire thing. They inserted themselves. They forced themselves in. And now that they were here, they had no intention of leaving. The shift was immediate. Where there had been ease, there was now tension. Where there had been laughter, there was now silence. Lisa took her time placing her order, running her finger down the menu dramatically before finally choosing a steak that cost more than my entire meal. Appetizers started stacking up again. Drinks were ordered without hesitation. It was happening. Again. But this time, we weren't caught off guard. This time, we were ready. As soon as the server came back, I didn't hesitate. I waved him over and, loud enough for the whole table to hear, told him we would all be getting separate checks. The reaction was instant. Lisa's expression shifted, her carefully curated performance faltering for the first time. Greg leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at me like I had personally betrayed him. He tried to guilt-trip us, acting like we were the ones being rude, like we had forced them into this position, as if we owed them for the very fact that they had deigned to join us. Jess, finally shaking off her initial shock, reminded them that they weren't even invited. Lisa, ever the manipulator, dismissed it completely. She acted as if setting boundaries was some kind of personal attack. She started launching into a speech about how many meals we had shared together, how long we had known each other, how this wasn't the way friends treated each other. And that's when it happened. Lisa pulled her final, desperate move. She put down her menu, crossed her arms, and, with complete confidence, said that since we had excluded them, we should at least cover their bill as an apology. The sheer, unfiltered entitlement. The table went silent. And then, we laughed. Not polite chuckles, not awkward titters. Actual, full-on, uncontrollable laughter. The absurdity of it, the audacity, the absolute nerve. They had crashed our dinner and were now demanding we pay for them because we hadn't invited them. They had done mental gymnastics so extreme they practically landed in another dimension. We laughed. We finished our meals. We paid our own checks. And when the bill came to Greg and Lisa, reality finally set in. They were stuck. For the first time in years, they had to pay for themselves. The anger radiating off of them was palpable. They whispered back and forth, frantically trying to figure out a way out of this. They took longer than anyone else, no doubt debating whether to fake an emergency, conveniently forget their wallets, or find some other desperate excuse. But in the end, with no other options, they begrudgingly pulled out a credit card, their faces twisted with barely concealed fury. As we stood up to leave, Jess muttered under her breath, just loud enough for all of us to hear, that we were never telling Josh anything again. And we all agreed. Update 3. We expected consequences, but we weren't prepared for just how far Greg and Lisa would go. The next morning, our phones lit up like Christmas trees, each of us bombarded with long, carefully constructed texts designed to manipulate, guilt, and shame us into submission. It was obvious they had spent the entire night stewing over what had happened, crafting their messages with the kind of meticulous effort they had never once put into actually paying their fair share. Every word dripped with self-pity, every sentence twisted reality just enough to make themselves the victims. It was almost impressive, in a way, if it weren't so infuriating. They played every card in the deck, starting with the wounded friend's routine. They were hurt, they said. Blindsided. Betrayed. They had considered us family, and yet we had treated them like strangers, like they weren't good enough to be included. They just couldn't believe we would deliberately humiliate them like that. They weren't mad, no, they were just deeply disappointed. The kind of disappointment that was meant to weigh on us, to make us feel like we had done something unspeakably cruel. As if we were the ones who had forced them into an uncomfortable situation, rather than the other way around. But that was just the opening act. Once they realized appealing to our empathy wasn't enough, they switched gears entirely. Then came the blame. We weren't just thoughtless, we were selfish. Inconsiderate. Ungrateful. They claimed we had changed, that we had once been kind, once been generous, but now we were nothing more than money-obsessed, bitter people who didn't know the true meaning of friendship. Friendship is about support, they said. Friendship is about lifting each other up, not keeping score. It was an absurd thing to hear from two people who had turned every dinner into an unspoken calculation of how much they could get away with. But they said it with such conviction, as if they truly believed it. As if they truly saw themselves as the victims here. And, in the most audacious move of all, they even implied that we had been the ones benefiting from them all these years. They claimed they had always been generous, that they had never cared about who paid for what, that they had supported us in ways we clearly never appreciated. It was beyond delusional. And when that didn't work, they went straight for the insults. They called us disgusting. They called us pathetic. They said we were toxic. They accused us of being immature, petty, and cruel. They said they had never been so disappointed in a group of people before, that we had embarrassed ourselves more than we had embarrassed them. It was a complete 180 from the guilt-ridden, emotional manipulation they had started with, but it was so transparent that it was almost laughable. They had expected us to crumble under their disappointment, and when we didn't, they lashed out. But they weren't done yet. Then came Josh. Of course. Josh, the one person who had still been wavering, who had refused to take a firm stance when it mattered, sent his own message. It wasn't aggressive like Greg and Lisa's, but it was just as frustrating in its own way. He played the role of the peacemaker, the middleman, the person who just wanted everyone to get along. He told us we had overreacted, that we had taken things too far, that we had made too big of a deal over something that wasn't that serious. He said we should have just let it go, should have just gone along with it for one last time to keep the peace. It was the same thing he had been doing for years. Trying to smooth things over. Trying to avoid conflict. Trying to convince us that it was easier to accept being used than it was to deal with the fallout of setting a boundary. And that was the last straw. Jess, who had been holding back longer than any of us, was the first to snap. She cut through the nonsense with brutal clarity, finally saying what we had all been thinking. We didn't keep the peace by letting people walk all over us. If Josh wanted to keep funding Greg and Lisa's indulgence, he was more than welcome to. But he shouldn't expect us to keep playing along. And just like that, Josh was out, too. That was it. The last tether to the old dynamic had been severed. And the rest of us? We thrived. For the first time we had stress-free dinners. We didn't have to secretly calculate how much we actually owed while knowing we'd still end up paying more. We didn't have to resentfully cover for someone else's $20 cocktails or three-course meals. We didn't have to watch people take advantage of our silence. We paid for our own food, and that was it. And that's how it ended. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with a final explosive fight. Just a slow, steady decline into irrelevance. It turns out that once you stop letting people use you, they lose interest very quickly.